While all eyes were on the DNC this week, MIT released some data that confirmed our worst fears about the Supreme Court. The university's incoming class will be significantly less diverse than in previous years, and that's thanks to last year's ruling that gutted affirmative action. MIT, one of the first to release enrollment data since that ruling, says its percentage of black students dropped to 5% from 15% last year. And the percentage of Hispanic and Latino students dropped to 11%, down from 16%. Overall, all racial and ethnic minority groups had a decrease in enrollment except for Asian Americans, who had a 7% increase. And the university actually saw this coming. It was among several universities and colleges that signed an amicus brief to the High Court 2 years ago in support of keeping race-conscious admissions. Joining me now, Eddie Glaude Jr., James S. McDonnell, distinguished professor at Princeton University. He's also an MSNBC political analyst. Professor, it is great to see you as always. So this is not a surprise to anyone. I think when SCOTUS struck down affirmative action, you and others warned us about the impact this would have on students of color, saying that we would begin to see a kind of segregated higher education landscape. Your initial reaction now that we have seen these initial new numbers from one university, and what are you hearing from others in academia?
Well, first of all, it's great to see you, Eamon. We knew this was going to happen, as you said. I suspect that the data will be similar at the other Ivies, my own institution, Princeton, Harvard, Yale, Dartmouth, Penn, Cornell, and the like. We should probably see this across the board in terms of elite institutions and ranking or top state public institutions. We knew this. We knew the data. We saw what happened in California. We know just 10 years after Prop 209 was passed, only 96 freshmen, black freshmen, were admitted to a class of over 4,000 at UCLA. We saw a 44% decline between 2006 and 2022 at the University of Michigan. And so this was, in fact, the expected outcome. And what's so tragic about it, there are those folk who are reading this outcome as an example of what happens when merit is taken as the principal deciding factor, when in fact, this is actually proving the opposite, Eamon.
The New York Times professor pointed out that other schools now could feel pressure to demonstrate results consistent with MIT's or to reveal their admissions diversity in terms of their classes. Otherwise, they could open up themselves up to critics who might say that they found a way to somehow defy, the Supreme Court's ban. Your thoughts on this?
Yeah, there's going to be some downward pressure. Remember, affirmative action is not an issue for the local community college. It's not an issue for the service institutions, public institutions that are not the kind of the top ranking schools in the state. This is about who gains access to the top schools in the country. And that gets us into some sticky questions, Eamon, about the inequality of the landscape of higher education that we might need to talk about. But we're going to see these downward pressures. And what's also not being talked about in this discussion is what's happening in secondary schools, the inequality in high schools, the inequality that's evidenced in elementary school, who gets access to Head Start, who gets access to early education. And that's impacting the quality of applications that we see to these elite institutions. So when people just talk about it as merit, they're not paying attention to the inequality, the structural inequality, Eamon, that defines the landscape of American education from K through 12 up to the colleges and universities. Yeah,
you bring up an important point about the admissions process generally, because after the ruling, you had schools revamping their recruitment and admissions process by leaning on students' application essays, making test scores optional, broadening outreach to high school and low-income communities, all of them trying to address this issue. What other options do you see for administrators in this post-affirmative action world to try to avoid this MIT result of a lack of diversity and how they can actually be effective?
I think they need to be courageous and really live their values. If they're committed to a diverse class, remember, admissions processes, Eamon, are some of the most kind of contrived processes. Just think, if schools were not able to take in consideration region, right? Yeah. Most schools, say on the Northeast, would have most of their students probably coming from the Northeast, right? If schools weren't interested in taking under consideration athletics, legacy, right? Whether or not you're interested in the arts, or whatever, you would see a very different class because you can't take advantage of that knowledge in order to build the kind of community you need to build. So what does it mean that we can't take into consideration race? Right? What it will mean is that they can't build the kind of diverse class that they want to build. And we know that focusing on class alone can't address this issue. So part of what we have to deal with is the bad faith of these actors who are kind of pressing this issue. We also need to understand that this is a kind of two-front assault, not only on admissions, but DEI generally. So even if you get admitted to these institutions, they're attacking DEI offices so that the experience is not, shall we say, as welcoming, as supportive as it might be. So I think institutions need to live their values and not be afraid of being sued. Bring the full weight of their reputation to bear in the fight for a diverse higher education landscape, Amy.
Professor Eddie Glaude, Jr., I can't thank you enough. Such an important conversation, one we're going to follow throughout its developments and twists and turns, but greatly appreciate your voice as always, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.